Today we're going to return to our discussion of game theory and think about it from a more dynamic point of view. So first of all, let's go back to what we were talking about last time and think about the differences between stag hunts, prisoner's dilemmas, and prisoner's delights. A prisoner's delight is the best kind of situation to be in, not only for each individual person, but for the group. Because it turns out then, look, the real question is, what happens to me if I cooperate and you don't? Okay? In a prisoner's delight, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to benefit anyway. I have a reason to be cooperative, whether you are or not. Because if you don't cooperate, I'm no worse off, and in fact, my effort doesn't become pointless. I still gain from it. So here's Brian Skirm's example of a prisoner's delight. Two people are in a rowboat, one's behind the other. Each have oars, they've been out fishing. Hot dinner awaits across the lake. If one doesn't row for some reason, the other will row to get them there. And if one rows, the other prefers to row to get there faster. And so if you row, well, you're getting toward dinner, right? If the other person doesn't help, you'll get there slowly. If they help, you'll get there faster, so it's better for you if they help. On the other hand, that they might not help is no reason for you not to row. You've got an incentive to row. And actually, they're hungry, so they've got an incentive to row also. So guess what? You both row. You both get there quickly. It's all good, right? So it's a situation that encourages cooperation. In the case of a stag hunt, if I go out there and cooperate by, in this case, hunting the stag, and you don't cooperate, then I'm going to fail. My efforts will be in vain. And so my cooperation doesn't really help if you don't cooperate. What I do is pointless. Okay, here's the example. Two people are sitting in a rowboat again, one behind the other. You've been out fishing again, hot dinner across the lake. Now each has one oar. And if I just row on my side and you don't row on your side, we just go around in a circle, right? We don't make any advance at all. So we both have to do it to actually get to our goal. If I do this and you don't, I mean, it's not like we get further from the goal. We don't sink or anything. Nevertheless, the boat goes around in circles. We don't get fed. In the case of a prisoner's dilemma, it's worse. If I cooperate and you don't, then actually I'm worse off. Okay? It's as if we're in the rowboat again, and now imagine you're really tired. You could camp on this shore for the night, but you'd rather get back to the opposite shore and get that dinner. But either prefers not to row no matter what the other does. Well, in this case, okay, you're willing to row, but I'm not. So I have an incentive to just stay there and not have the dinner. And so if we both in effect have that option, we both are going to be tired, we're both going to just stay there and miss our dinner. And so I don't know if that's a great example of a prisoner's dilemma. If you think about the original prisoner's dilemma, if I cooperate, in other words, in this case, cooperate with you, so I stay silent, but you confess to the police and implicate me, then I go to jail for a long time. I'm way worse off. So it's not just that, I'll just stay here. No, the dimension of this that is not brought out is, look, if I cooperate and you don't, then I'm way worse off. And so I don't think this is actually the greatest example. But here's the general idea. If I cooperate and you don't, well, if I benefit anyway, I'm in a prisoner's delight type of situation. If my effort is then wasted, but I'm no worse off, I'm in a stag hunt. If I end up suffering, if I end up worse off, then I've got a prisoner's dilemma. Now notice that in the delight and in the dilemma, there is one Nash equilibrium, pure strategy Nash equilibrium, that is. And here, we're both benefiting. We're both getting the best outcome. Here, at least the best outcome we can get jointly. Here, we're getting the worst outcome. And in the stag hunt, there are actually two Nash equilibria. One where we both cooperate, one where neither cooperates. And so if I cooperate and you don't, I'm not even in Nash equilibrium now. I'm in a situation that's true in all of these, but in this case, that's one where we just don't go anywhere, we don't catch the stag. And so my effort was wasted. Well, let's think more about the prisoner's dilemma. This is the general idea here. Being silent here is equivalent to cooperating with the other person. Talking is equivalent to defecting from the other person. So to cooperate with the police in this situation is actually to defect from the interests of the other prisoner. In any case, if we're both silent, we both get our second choice. If, on the other hand, we both talk, we get our third choice. If I cooperate and you don't, then actually I get my worst choice. So that's a very bad situation for me. But the Nash equilibrium here tends to be follow the arrows, we both talk. And so we get not nearly as good an outcome as we could have gotten if we had both remained silent. Well, if this happens as a one-off thing, then actually there is a powerful incentive here for each of us to talk and get that worse outcome. But suppose we are routinely in these situations. We are in a situation that is known as an iterated prisoner's dilemma. So we keep facing this. Then you might think we develop strategies. We talked about this last time of, let's say, we're not just happening to be in the same place at the same time, but we're part of the same criminal gang. And we can expect to often be in this situation with the police. Then we may well evolve a different strategy. So if we think about facing these things again and again, if each of us plays a dominant strategy and does what's best for us no matter what the other person does, the group is going to lose, right? And we realize that. We realize, wait a minute, we're going to face this situation again and again. And if we keep doing this, if we individually play our dominant strategy, we're going to end up worse off. Well, if we face this repeatedly, maybe we can do better. So we might formulate a different sort of strategy. Now, there are real-world examples, and we talked about some of these last time, right? The actual criminal gang. What are some other situations outside of life of crime where you face this kind of prisoner's dilemma with the same people again and again? Yeah?
Not necessarily crime, but like whenever like me and my brother get like no good. So yeah.
Okay, you and your brother get up to no good. I'm not sure I want to know the details, but yes, I mean, there are all sorts of ways in which siblings have to deal with the parents in a way that's kind of analogous to these prisoners dealing with the police. My brother and I were in a similar situation. In fact, I was 7 years older than my brother, and he used that against me all the time. The moment my parents would walk out of the room, he would simply dive and attack me and fight me. And then the moment my parents would come back into the room, either he's suddenly back on the sofa being a good boy, or he's saying, "Daddy attacked me," right? And I would be in trouble. And so I get where you're coming from. Later, he got his revenge because he grew up to be 6'4" and a very good athlete. And so then, when he was much taller than I was, but still 7 years younger, he was in junior high or something, and here I am in college, but he's still way bigger than I am. And so I'm walking down the hall, and suddenly he was then a hockey player, and so he would say things like, hip check, come on, bam, and just slam me into the wall, like, ha ha ha. And of course, when he was 3 and I was 10, he could do that kind of thing. And a 3-year-old can't really hurt a 10-year-old by slamming into it, but a serious 12-year-old could, well, never mind. Okay, in any event, yes, that's one example. Are there other real-world examples? Yeah?
When you're in trouble in the classroom like this, as like a kid, elementary?
Yeah, good, you get in trouble in the classroom, then it's like the teacher in the role of the police here. Usually teachers don't question you separately, but I was in a few situations where the teacher or the principal questioned us separately. So I've been there. Other more organizational situations like this. Yeah.
So while I was at drill, apparently something had went down that while I was away doing something else, and when I went to IC, like pulling everyone in individually, trying to get to the bottom of it, hoping that someone would snitch.
Okay, yes. So there are a lot of situations in organizations where there are rules about something, and it's a question of, now sometimes here there are good reasons, sometimes bad reasons. So people violate rules of organizations all the time, and sometimes they have good reason to do it. They think, look, in this case, the rule seems to be giving me the wrong result, and it's too inflexible. In fact, in general, there's a problem in organizations. When an organization is small, it tends to allow for a lot of individual judgment on the people in it. And so you can really judge each case on its merits. But as an organization starts growing, you've got a problem because you need more and more bureaucratic rules that you apply to everyone evenly. Now, I think that happens for two reasons. One is you've got the problem of injustice. If one person is making judgments, then often they can adapt things to individual cases and come up with what seems right for that individual case. But if you're relying on a lot of different people to do that, for one thing, they may come up with different judgments in different cases. And then you've got a problem of justice. This person says, but wait, that person was allowed to do this, why am I not allowed to do it? So that's one problem. The second thing is that in a large organization, can you really trust all those people to have good judgment? You've got 1,000 employees whose judgment you're trusting. How many of them are going to have good judgment? I mean, you try to do the best you can, but a certain percentage of them are not going to have good judgment. And so as organizations grow, they get more and more rule-bound and more inflexible, and that becomes a problem eventually. The bureaucracy starts coming up with a lot of wrong answers, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. Still, there are reasons to support those rules often because really they are the best in general, even if they get the wrong result in this outcome. Now, this means that anybody in a sufficiently large organization is going to find they're in some situations where it's really convenient to set aside the rules. And so what do you do in these cases? Well, let's say you and I are in these situations. And we might be in short, a similar kind of thing where there's something like a prisoner's dilemma. And it can work either way. Maybe if we insist on following the rules, we get a suboptimal outcome. But maybe, on the other hand, if we break the rule, we end up generating an even bigger problem. And so I was just talking to a student about this who encountered a sort of situation where he got into big trouble for violating one of these rules. He had good reasons to violate it, but still it was his job to enforce that rule. And so even if in this case it was something that seemed to lead to the wrong outcome, the organization said, but look, if we don't enforce the rule here, then all sorts of other cases might happen where things work out very badly. So you can set this up in a way that, look, if you don't enforce the rule, then you're going to have all sorts of people violating this. And that's going to be a real problem. On the other hand, you can set it up in such a way that it looks like enforcing the rule leads you to the suboptimal outcome because you become too inflexible. Yeah.
The Wells Fargo crisis,
Yeah.
where they were inflating their numbers, something along those lines. And it seems like a weird situation in which you had both extremes. So you had Wells Fargo rigorously enforcing their sky-high expectations of what they wanted out of their different banks around the country. And then at the same time, you had people in an attempt to follow the rule that had been sent down from on high by the CEO, perform this well or else, they broke the law. So to follow one rule, they broke another.
Right. Okay,
If that
good.
makes any sense.
Yeah, that, I don't know how many of you know about that case. Those of you who took business ethics know more than you want to know about it. But in any event, that's something where Wells Fargo grew by acquiring other banks. And one of the banks it acquired had an ethic that was rather questionable, okay? And I guess I need to give you a little more information. So here's the idea. Wells Fargo said, look, we're going to acquire these companies, but we are not going to actually impose a uniform standard on them. We want people to feel a sense of ownership for their branches and their sub-organizations. We also want them to adapt to local conditions and so on. So there were good reasons why they said, we're not going to really enforce a company-wide policy about a variety of things. But anyway, one of these subgroups that had been absorbed into Wells Fargo and was allowed to retain its culture required people to meet very, very aggressive targets. And here's the problem. You had to they had to come up with all sorts of new accounts. It was measured by the number of accounts and the number of accounts per customer. Now, the larger organization knew this was nonsense. This is not what you focus on. In fact, they had research that showed if somebody, there's something like 8 functions, 8 ways in which people interact with a bank. And if somebody interacted with, say, 3 of them, they were highly likely to just go back to the same bank for the other 8. So it was a question of different functions. It's like, you have a savings account with us? Wouldn't you like a checking account? Hey, how about your mortgage? We want to be your mortgage company too, et cetera, that kind of thing. But it wasn't really how many savings accounts you have. But this subunit focused on that. Now, suppose you are in an organization that is going to reward you for, in fact, not only reward you for coming up with a certain number of accounts, but also penalize you and maybe fire you if you don't. So what's your incentive now?
Keep your job.
Well, to keep your job and to do it, you have to get lots of accounts. Now, how do you get new accounts?
Stimulated funding.
Yes, one way to do it is to, but look, you're sitting in a bank, right? It's not like you're going out to the street corner saying, hey, wouldn't you like to open a savings account at Wells Fargo? And so how do you really generate this? Well, they started signing up family members and so on. But all right, you've signed up, how many family members do you know, right, who would open up an account at Wells Fargo Bank? So you run out of those pretty quickly, and then you think, well, Uncle Joe, I haven't talked to him about it, but hey, I bet I can ask Mom if she knows his social security number, and open up an account in his name. And then why does he need just one account? I bet he needs 5 accounts. And you've put $1,000 in the bank? Well, gosh, I could make that 10 accounts with $100 each, and so on. And so people started falsifying all this stuff. And it was a case where now you and I are playing this game. You start falsifying it. Well, I think, look, it's best if neither of us falsifies things, but if I don't falsify things, if I play it straight and you're falsifying them, then I'm really in trouble. I get fired. I don't look nearly as good as you. And so there's an incentive. Basically, it's a prisoner's dilemma, and you start finding people tending toward the worst outcome. We both end up here. Defecting is really, we both start falsifying things and making up false accounts and fraudulent accounts and all of this kind of thing. Doing a lot of this without customers' knowledge, because if I don't do it and you do, then I'm really screwed. It would be best for all of us if we were all honest, but the fact is there's a huge incentive to it. So yes, this is a great example of a prisoner's dilemma in a real organization. And it took a long time for this to emerge, where people started realizing this. Now, at the central bank headquarters, a certain group knew about this all the time. They were like, wait a minute, there are all these new accounts out there, but actually the amount being invested is not growing. So something's wrong. And they tried to blow the whistle early, but nobody wanted to listen because these people were such great performers. Look at their metrics. And nobody wanted these naysayers based in Charlotte to be saying, no, something's wrong. Kind of like the UNC thing, which would be another example. You know about this academic scandal, don't you? A professor who at one point was teaching over a 3-year period, something like 72 classes.
Oh, yeah.
And you think, wait, how's that even possible? In the fall, people thought I was insane for teaching 5. So 5 times, let's see, over 3 years, if I did that every semester, including summers, I'd still only be up to 45. So it's like, what was happening there? And it took, but on the other hand, everybody had a certain incentive to go along with the fraud. Okay, so it can happen in all sorts of organizations that you fall into these negative patterns. People have an incentive to do this because basically, if you do the right thing and somebody else doesn't, you look really bad in comparison. You're in trouble. And so whenever you're in that kind of situation, you're in a prisoner's dilemma. And it can easily happen in an organization. Now, what do you do about that? You realize this. Well, how do you cope with situations like this? It's a situation, notice, where people have mutual power. Because basically, the outcome of what I do is going to depend on what you do. And so there's a sense in which both prisoners have power over the other. Now, it looks like they're both powerless compared to the police, but it's not really true, right? If I finger you, I'm having significant power over you, and what you do affects me. So we do, whether we want to think of it in those terms or not, we have an influence on each other. We have power over the other person. And we're concerned to prosper individually, but also we want to have the group prosper. If I'm in an organization, I don't want my people in prisoner's dilemmas all the time. That's going to be bad for them individually. It's going to be bad for the group. So we want a strategy for thinking through this problem. How do we avoid prisoner's dilemmas? And if they keep popping up, how do we deal with them? How do we structure things so that we negotiate through these the best way we can? Well, here is a strategy that we might adopt. This turns out to be a really robust strategy, and in a lot of contexts, the best strategy to have. It's called tit-for-tat. You start by cooperating, and then you do whatever the other player did the last time. If they defect, you defect, okay, to punish them. But if they cooperate, you keep cooperating. And here's the little joke. I'm not going to Sid's funeral. He won't be coming to mine. That's actually a variant on what something Yogi Berra once said, which is, I go to other people's funerals so that they'll come to mine. Yes?
Does this strategy require like you perceiving it as a repeated game? So what if you like don't perceive the situation as a repeated game? The strategy wouldn't work.
That's right. This is only if you recognize this is going to be a repeated game. So if this looks like a one-off to you, then you think, well, I'm never going to interact with this person again, so why bother cooperating? And there is a powerful tendency to defect and get the suboptimal outcome. But here, if you think, wait, I'm going to often be in this situation, even if it's not with these exact people, I'm in this similar kind of situation, right? I mentioned the New York City driving thing, where people are often in this situation of having to merge lanes. And so they just do it automatically. Everybody just says, it'll be best for us all if we take turns, and they just do that. And that's a case of, in effect, saying, look, I realize you won't be the person probably that I'm in this situation with next time. But nevertheless, we're all going to be in this situation a lot, so let's just adopt this rule. And you only defect if the other person defects. But as long as everybody cooperates, and basically, if everybody's playing tit for tat, they start by cooperating, and then everybody keeps cooperating, right? You take turns, and then the other person takes turns, and it keeps going like that until some jerk decides no, to nose his way in, and then it starts breaking down. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about advantages and disadvantages of all these strategies, but that's a particularly powerful one. Now, you might think, but that's a little too harsh, because after all, you defect, and then I punish you for defecting. But then you might punish me for defecting, and we can get into this cycle. So you might think, I should be more forgiving of that. You can play tit for 2 tats or 3 tats or whatever, for n in general. You start by cooperating, and then you cooperate unless the other player has defected a certain number of times in a row. Then you punish them. So here's tit for tat in boxing. Guy punches him and says, now I owe him one. Well, this is if, I don't punch back until I've taken a certain number of hits. Think about the Sermon on the Mount. If someone slaps you on the cheek, offer him the other cheek also. But what happens when I run out of cheeks? I've only got the 2. Okay? He's hit both. Now he's going to hit me again. What do I do, Jesus? Well, one interpretation would be, after 2, hit him back. I'm not claiming that's serious biblical interpretation, by the way. But anyway, you could interpret that as, forgive a certain number of times. Now, of course, there's another passage that says, how many times should I forgive? Oh, 70 times 7. That would be like tit for 490 tats. But in any event, this is, I'm joking, but that would be a strategy. Here's another strategy. Just always defect. Always play your dominant strategy. So, guy might cooperate with you. Good, screw him. Okay, I've called that the devil strategy. You just always defect. Okay, you just always play it for yourself, never cooperate. Of course, there's the opposite of that. I've called it Tolstoy. You just always cooperate. Okay, you take the Sermon on the Mount thing as, look, imagine you have an unlimited number of cheeks. You just always cooperate. If the other person defects, still you maintain a kind of moral nobility. You always cooperate. Here's one. It goes by the name Friedman because it's a computer science Friedman who first proposed this. You start by cooperating, but then you always defect after the first defection. So basically, you know, you're nice, but after the first, boom, I'm done with you. Actually, Descartes says something about this when he's setting up skeptical arguments in the first meditation. He says, well, you know, I know the times in the past when I've been deceived by my senses, and you should never trust anybody who's once deceived you. Well, that is the idea of this. Look, you've deceived me, so I will never trust you again. Now, just as you have here, always defect after the first defection, you could have a generalized version where you defect after a certain number of defections. You know, first, you know, what is it? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And so that might be a way, actually that could be a way of understanding this idea. I'll let you fool me once, but then I punish you. Or it might be, you know, I wait for the second defection, and then I clamp down, and I never cooperate again. Now this is a dirty trick one, okay? This is called Giass, after a person who, in a tournament, proposed this strategy. You start by cooperating, you do what the other player did the last time, but occasionally, maybe 10% of the time or something, you sneak in a random defection. You think, you know, yeah, I'm generally cooperative, but occasionally I'm going to stab you in the back and try to gain a little more out of that. Because after all, I'm better off if I stab you in the back. If you cooperate and I defect, I win. So I'm going to occasionally do that. And I thought this sort of symbolized this attitude. 5 signs a nice person secretly has negative intentions. And this Giass strategy is a bit like that. Of course, I could just be random. I could just flip a coin. I could just think, best thing to do is be unpredictable. Now, in a pure conflict game, that does make sense. If we're competing, I want to be unpredictable. You know, you're calling plays on that team, I'm calling plays on the other team. I want to be unpredictable in what I call. And the same thing, let's say I've got the puck and I'm headed toward the hockey goal. The goalie's there trying to defend. I want to be unpredictable. I don't want the goalie to be able to think, oh, he's going to do what he did last time. Or he's going to shoot it in the direction I didn't move last time. Then I become predictable. So I've got to make myself random. This is one I've called Nietzsche. And it's the opposite of tit-for-tat, actually. Okay, you start by cooperating, but then you do the opposite of what the other player did the last time. So basically, you cooperate with the stronger, but you dominate the weak. You adopt master morality, in other words. And you say, you too are one of the noble morality. You too believe in the strength. You too believe in the lion, the blonde beast that emerges over the plains. Then great, I'll cooperate with you. We lions should stick together. But those weak-willed people who believe in slave morality, we dominate them. I don't know if that's a fair description of Nietzsche. I was just looking for a title for this. And it does seem to me that this is a strategy that goes along with certain biological hierarchies. An animal might well adopt this as you're in a position in the social hierarchy. Well, the people above you, you better cooperate with them because they can hurt you. But on the other hand, the people below you in the hierarchy, you can defect, you can dominate them. No need to cooperate with them. Okay, so now I want to imagine how these do if we put them against each other. This is what Axelrod did in the evolution of cooperation. He decided to create a tournament of repeated prisoners' dilemmas and try out these various strategies against one another. He allowed people to submit strategies, and lots of computer scientists, economists, and a variety of other people did submit strategies, and then they were pitted against each other in random combinations in this big tournament. And so I want to try to run a little bit of this just intuitively so we can see how it goes. Here's one prisoner's dilemma. This is one where, let's say, you get 2 points for cooperating. You get only 1 if you both defect. But then, if one person cooperates and the other defects, the defector gets 10, and the person who cooperated gets 0. Now notice in this situation, we do have a prisoner's dilemma, because if you think about dominant strategies, you realize that row over here has defecting as his dominant strategy, and column, look at what's happening there, also has defection as a dominant strategy. So this is going to be the Nash equilibrium. but that's suboptimal. The two of them could have done better. But notice here, the improvement is not great. So this first scenario is one where cooperation produces a benefit, but it's a relatively small benefit. On the other hand, defection really wins big time, okay? It's 10 as opposed to 2. And so defection pays off in this first scenario. And I want to contrast this with a prisoner's dilemma, where there's a different payoff matrix, where here you get 5 points for cooperating, 2 for defecting, and then it's still 10 and 0 for defecting. In this case, there's still a payoff for defecting, but you get a bigger payoff for cooperating, say 2.5 times this, and half the value of this, so it pays off more. Now this kind of thing is going to matter hugely to who wins these tournaments and how this all goes. We have to ask, how big is the payoff for defecting, and how big is the benefit accrued to cooperating? And those things matter. If there's a huge advantage to cooperation and only a little additional payoff for defecting, people have a pretty strong incentive to cooperate. If, on the other hand, there's a huge payoff for defecting and only a small one for cooperating, people are going to tend to defect. So, let's then see how this goes. Suppose we have tit-for-tat playing another tit-for-tat player. I'm going to cooperate, but I'll punish you if you defect. Well, you have the same attitude, so neither of us is ever first to defect. So, what's the average payoff? On that first one, where cooperation doesn't pay off that much, well, it's 2. On the second one, it's 5, okay, because we just are constantly cooperating. So we get whatever the payoff is for cooperating mutually. Now what happens if tit-for-tat plays Giass? Giass is this strategy that's just like it, but sneaks in a random defection. So here is that random defection. Okay, C meaning cooperate, D meaning defect. Look what happens then. They're merrily cooperating, and then Giass stabs the tit-for-tat player in the back, right? Randomly defects. Well now, tit-for-tat says, I'm going to punish you for that. So they defect the next time. But Giass goes back to playing tit-for-tat and says, well, you cooperated, so I'll cooperate. Oh, but now you've defected and I've cooperated. So I'm going to punish you for that defection. Well, I'm going to reward you for your cooperation. And now we get into this cycle of cooperations and defections until the next time there's a random defection. Well, what does this do? Actually, both end up benefiting as a result of this if there's a big payoff to defection and little benefit to cooperation. On the other hand, there's only a slight change. The Giass player does a little better. The tit-for-tat player does a little worse than the 5 outcome we had before, if there's a bigger payoff to cooperation. So, it looks like this Giass player actually wins. The random defection, right, makes them come out better, and here a lot better, here a little better. That's kind of surprising, and for an ethicist, dismaying. The occasional stab in the back seems to pay off here. Well, what if we have tit-for-tat playing Nietzsche, who does the opposite? It's interesting. They both start cooperating, but then Nietzsche says, you are weak, I will dominate you, and defects. But then gets punished for that. Well, tit-for-tat, meanwhile, has cooperated again, because they haven't yet seen the defection. So Nietzsche dominates them again, but then they start punishing Nietzsche. And so you get alternates of pairs of defections and pairs of cooperations. So it actually looks kind of similar. Instead of 2 and 2 on that first scenario, where cooperation doesn't help you much and defection does, Nietzsche beats tit-for-tat 3.8 to 3. But here, where the default was 5 if we just mutually cooperate, they both end up suffering. Nietzsche gives you 4.9, and tit-for-tat ends up with 3.9. So there, that attitude ends up producing a more negative outcome. What if we just do something random? And here I generated this just by flipping a coin, but of course it would be different every time. Then, well, you can see this generates defections, and so where defection pays off, this actually does something better, 3 instead of 2. But where defection doesn't pay off as well and cooperation does, we get a lot less cooperation. So instead of 5, we have these values, 4 point something. Now suppose we have tit-for-tat against the devil. The devil just always defects. Well, then everybody's going to always defect. So we just keep getting the Nash equilibrium, and that ends up hurting. In both cases, the devil does better because of that initial defection when the other person cooperated, but that's the last cooperation. After that, it's just defection. And so as a result, this is a little worse, this is a lot worse than the default of cooperation. Now notice that in each of these cases, tit-for-tat doesn't do better than the alternative, right? It does as well, or sometimes it does less well. In fact, if defection pays off, it does a lot less well. What if we put Nietzsche up against the devil? Ooh, then Nietzsche just always cooperates. Because Nietzsche basically goes belly up and says, you're stronger than I am, right? Meanwhile, the devil says, yes, I am, and dominates. And so this is a case where Nietzsche is totally screwed. I mean, he just gets 0 points, and the devil gets 10. So the devil can find the weak and just pummel them mercilessly here. On the other hand, put the devil against the devil, and things turn out very badly. 1 instead of a potential 2, here 2 instead of 5 you would get from mutual cooperation. What if Nietzsche plays Nietzsche? Okay, doing the opposite of what the other player did. Well, then you just get into this bouncing back and forth of cycles of mutual cooperation and mutual defection. And so 1.5 instead of that 2 you could get through cooperation here, 3.5 instead of the 5 you could get there. All right, well, I hope you're getting the sense of how this idea would sort of go. Suppose you set up a tournament and you match all these strategies and many more besides against each other and let them play and find out who ends up getting the highest score. Well, it turns out that some strategies, when you do this, are what Axelrod calls kingmakers. They don't do well. In fact, they do often terribly in these tournaments, but they end up being the ones that really destroy certain other candidates. And so it's like they're not good themselves, but they kind of determine which other strategies succeed and which fail. So one of these is called tester, which starts out by defecting to find out if you'll punish it. That's not a good strategy because often you will just get punished for the rest of the time. And so tester does badly. But somebody who's super cooperative, like Tolstoy or even Tit-for-Tat, is going to get harmed by that. Tranquilizer is one that lures you with a certain number of cooperations and then starts defecting. Okay, to try to think, I'm your friend, I'm your friend, I'm your friend, and then I get you, okay? And if you are highly susceptible to, hey, you know, I will keep turning the other cheek, you're going to get pummeled by that. Are there real-life kingmakers? That is to say, people in organizations, for example, who do not do well, but kind of determine who does well, because they pose problems for the others, and they have to deal with those problems successfully. I like this, don't play stupid with me, I'm better at it. But are there people like that in organizations? Yeah.
My mom was actually telling me that there's a lady at one of the offices, like in Houston, I think, that is only there because she's pretty, basically, so she has no idea what she's doing. So, like, every time, like, other people around her have to fix her stuff, they look better, technically. It's like, they're doing more work, and they're looking like more confident and stuff like that. But, you know, it's still like, detrimental to everybody around her, because it's more work, like, stuff that has to be fixed.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, there are people who pose problems for an organization of a variety of kinds. Maybe they don't do their work, or maybe they're just extremely difficult people to deal with, right? And they can be the sort of person who either makes you look good if you interact with them the right way, or makes you look really bad if you don't. There's this saying, you know, don't wrestle with a pig. You'll get dirty and the pig enjoys it. That's sort of for the troublemaker. And actually, when I was a high school debater, we had a slogan that was kind of like that. He who plays in the dirt gets dirty was our deep thought. Because basically there were debate teams that were bad, and they would lead you down into bad arguments. But you would sound bad by getting entangled in these stupid arguments with them. And we used to find that occasionally we would debate a terrible team, and we'd do terribly. On the other hand, we'd debate a really good team, although we never won. We would look really good. So, I mean, the really strong teams in my ancient era of debate in our region were Bishop Girton, Bronx High School of Science, St. Brendan's, Brooklyn Prep. And when we would go up against those teams, we'd look like we were almost as good as they were. On the other hand, when we played terrible teams, and I won't mention some of the terrible schools in New England, but some of them were awful. But we would tend to look bad too, because it's like, that's such a dumb point, right? But if the opponent makes a really dumb argument, what do you do about that? And similarly in the workplace, somebody is either not doing their work at all, or they're causing trouble for people, or they produce terrible work, or they just, in a meeting, constantly make stupid points. What do you do about that, right? They're sort of kingmakers because, they're not going to rise in the organization. On the other hand, if you deal with them in the wrong way, it sinks you. So there's something like these sorts of strategies. Yeah.
I actually had something similar when I was doing debate. They made like some really dumb argument, like even our judge called them out on it, like at the end of the round, or the end of the thing, and it's like you still got an answer, and it was like super dumb. So like it's still there, and it has to be addressed at some point.
No, well, yeah, no, that's part of the problem, right? These people are. One strategy is just to avoid such people, and sometimes you can do that, but sometimes you can't. They're part of the group, and if you don't deal with it, especially if you're the boss and they're your employee, it's your job to deal with it. If you just avoid them and don't deal with it, which is what a lot of people do, but it means, gosh, that makes your group look bad. So yeah, sometimes you can get away with it, and sometimes you can't. Yeah.
Isn't this kind of like, there's like a whole genre of independent like horror thriller films, and there's like one called The Circle, and it's like 30 people in this room, and it's like all different kinds, so it's like some kids, like some old people, and it's like each round they determine one person who dies, and like if you break any of the rules, like other people die, so like it like adds up, and it ends up like only one person in theory is supposed to survive. I mean, they break it in the end, like 2 people do, but like are the kind of bold people in that like strategy choosing, because it's like you go around and they can debate, so it's like some people are intentionally gonna hold them down, but it like brings out the smart people and their strategies, and it's like, does that point out like who that you should be targeting?
Ooh, all right, that's an interesting scenario. That movie, or there's an Agatha Christie novel, And Then There Were None, that is a bit like this, where in the end, the police find this mansion on an island where these people were invited, and everyone's dead. And there was nobody who came into the island or left during this weekend, so like, how did they all end up dead? But it was something like that, where you've got this puzzle, and it's kind of like, there's a kingmaker, though, in the Agatha Christie thing, that person manages to kill off all the others and then commits suicide, so. But it makes it look like they were murdered too. So it's just this mystery. In any event, I just ruined that book for you, I'm sorry. But it's still a question of like, who was the person? But anyway, that's the sort of thing which is a bit like that, right? You've got somebody who is manipulating this and back, and they may or may not survive, but they are, in effect, setting up the structure that determines who else does.
They make it too far usually. Like they didn't, like in the movie, I don't think the like 2 like kingmakers won, but they made it almost to be.
Right, and that often happens in these tournaments too. I mean, sometimes these drop out very quickly if you've got a sort of thing where the weakest get dropped out and so on, but sometimes they don't. And in real life organizations, these people are often very hard to get rid of. Eventually, you get rid of them, just because they're not immortals, but they can be there causing problems for people for many, many years. And that really is a difficulty. All right, well, next time what we're gonna do is actually set things up so that we can play some tournaments. There are websites where you can set things up, choose which strategies you want to pit it against each other, and see how the tournament evolves. So next time we're gonna do that and try to extract some morals from that.